Hey guys, welcome to our Blue Table Talk in honor of Domestic Violence Month in October. Today we'll have an open discussion about domestic violence culture on college campuses and how we can encourage students to seek out the resources available to them. My name is Ashton Mayo-Beavers and I'm a member of the Mayo-Beaver chapter of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated here on Mercer University's campus.
And I'm James Simmons. I'm the president of the Iota Gamma chapter of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated here at Mercer University. I'm a electrical engineering master's student.
So a little bit about domestic violence. Domestic violence is something that affects so many men and women, and it's often never talked about and it's kept hidden. In fact, college-aged women between the ages of 16 and 24 have the highest per capita rate of intimate partner violence. 21% of college students reported having experienced dating violence by a current partner, and 2% of college students report experiencing dating violence by a previous partner. And it's important to note that anyone can be a victim of domestic violence, regardless of their race, gender, or sexuality.
Absolutely.
So let's get started with some of the questions. So do you think that the university environment can further exacerbate the fear associated with domestic violence?
Yeah, when you take basically a child, an 18-year-old, away from their family and the environment that they're comfortable in, it invites new challenges to their lives that they're not really sure how to handle. And, when I entered college, I did a lot of searching for, who I was apart from my family and my hometown. And it's easy to see how that could go very wrong if you get involved with the wrong crowd or, the wrong partner.
Yeah, so you think the new personal freedom that students discover as freshmen really plays into the kind of path that they take? So you talked a lot about the personal freedoms that freshmen really get exposed to. How do you think those paths or maybe those options and access to that personal freedom are proposed to a freshman student, not necessarily in an explicit way, but more of an implicit way?
Okay, yeah. I think freshmen are really just trying to figure out who they are. It can be I don't know.
Well, I think you were on the right track. I think especially a lot of freshman students, when we come onto campus, we're presented that college is this new place to find yourself, and almost there's not a lot of structure or barriers, and almost this rule-free place, when in actuality when we make some of those wrong decisions, especially exploring relationships and how we approach them, it can really affect and conflict with the personal freedom if we don't talk about the structures of relationships and how to treat people correctly and how to interact in relationships correctly with non-toxic and respectfully and everything like that.
Right. And toxicity is
yeah
something that's very culturalized now.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a very big topic, and honestly, I think it's harder to talk about it on a college age level because we've made it so popularized, and so it's how do we get more deep into it, especially with domestic violence? Another question I have, building off of that, many victims experience administrative challenges when it comes to reporting incidents, such as dragging their feet, not taking them seriously. How has this created a culture where staying silent is the new norm?
I feel like staying silent is a coping mechanism for a lot of people, because they don't really know who to reach out to, or they might not know how to start the conversation with the right person, even if they know who to reach out to, and that can be an embarrassing situation. Not that it's correct, but from that mindset, you could see how it would be. Now I'm stumbling now.
Just nerve-wracking, I guess, or intimidating. I think the administration itself, in any college campus, is intimidating because you're playing with your future and college career, but if you're going through something like a domestic violence issue and you want to report that, it's as a student, you're how will this jeopardize my future, or how will this affect my community and my environment around me and my peers? Because you are living and going to school in the same place, so it's all that housed into one. It's like, it's not a separate thing. So I think a lot of people, why it's so, they're deterred from speaking up is because like they want to keep things the way they are. They're in fear of like it's going to disrupt their norm, because it's very hard to like exit your environment in college, because like I said, you go to school with everybody at the same time.
Yeah, it's its own little community.
Exactly.
Everybody knows everything.
It's very small, very small. So how do you think, especially at our age, social media, we talked about how the coined term like toxicity and everything like that is really normalized and popularized, and we throw that around a lot, especially in a modern age. So how do you think that plays in, like, social media plays a big role in deterring students from speaking up? You touch on this a little bit, but.
Yeah, I mean, social media plays a huge role in that. I feel like abusers even have more access to their victims without necessarily even knowing them, or having that that block of, actually committing the act in person. You can cyber bully with 2 seconds of typing, as opposed to, going out and actually having that physical altercation.
Yeah.
And that also contributes to okay, back up. There are also social media platforms that provide a certain sort of anonymity that gives people a sense of comfort with bullying and abusing others, and it's really wild.
Yeah, and I think especially the way social media really enables like facts or like rumors to be spread so easily. It's a lot harder for a victim of domestic violence to seek their own justice in their situation when it's already been spread by somebody else. And so it's like finding the pinpoint of where, like, tracing it back, like, that's so hard unless you know how to get IP addresses and everything. Like, it's so hard when things are, like you said, that big part of anonymity, and like things can just be leaked. If you hear it from one person, even though it's not your own story to tell, it's a story that people like to share, unfortunately, and it's not their own. So it's very much, it's a lot harder for a person to claim their own justice or claim their own story and like actually get that without it being a rumor spread through social media, which is honestly the bad part about social media. Is like you said, the anonymity part, but also people's stories are much less their own. It's very, people can take that and like construe it, and so, which is very unfortunate when it comes to like people who want to actually speak up, so deterring them further, actually. So according to researchers, 82% of domestic violence, domestic, dating, and social violence was committed against women, and 18% against men. However, men are least likely to report the incidents, and men are often ignored in these conversations. How can we encourage male students on college campuses to speak up about the violence they experience? Yeah, it's a kind of a hard question.
Yeah.
I mean, I can go ahead and start, but like, I think for, especially when I think about when this conversation is like introduced, in casually, I don't automatically think of men being a part of the conversation, which is really bad, because we already have stereotyped domestic violence just being the victim as woman, female, and the perpetrator as a male, automatically making the division so quick and dividing conversations already. So I think that's why I think this conversation is important, because there are still a lot of male victims,
Absolutely.
And so they also need a space, while protecting the space of majority of the women have domestic violence cases, but also creating a space for men to come and feel protected as victims, and to have that space to talk as well.
Absolutely. I feel like men would be even less likely to come out and speak about being a victim of domestic violence, because it might make them seem less of a man,
Yeah.
For going through that, and that's really not the case. Abuse is abuse, whether you're a man or a woman.
So we've talked a lot about the difference between men and women as it comes to domestic violence and why they report it. So why do you think men stand by the bro code instead of holding their friends accountable who are engaging in domestic violence abuse towards their partners?
Yeah, I think it's a really uncomfortable conversation to call out your friend or your brother, and tell him that what he's doing is wrong. It's just joking around like, oh, my girlfriend was acting up last night, and it was like I almost hit her. I would hit her. I wanted to hit her. Anything like that. It's not funny. People joke around about that all the time. It's really not funny. And that's a huge red flag to domestic violence. And you really have to call out your brothers and your friends on that. And if they're actually committing those acts, that's something where you need to cut ties with that person. And if you feel like that it's gotten to that point, report them to somebody who's in the position to report it to the police. Or
so that, I think that goes a lot of hand in hand with like what I've heard is like locker room talk. We've heard this term throughout politics. We heard it through just public figures, just the fact that this talk that you're talking about in the bro code that's so casual but is also so disrespectful, but we've normalized it to be okay to let it pass through conversation. How do you feel like this locker room talk has contributed to the normalcy of domestic violence, especially on campus and young adults who are in young adult relationships?
Yeah, I think that has to go along with the peer pressure of having those, just joking around about it and, laughing it off, it's not that big of a deal or anything like that. It might seem like it's more common than it actually is. And, somebody who wouldn't, previously actually go out and commit acts of domestic violence would now, now they've been in those situations and had those conversations and been joking around about it, they might not think that it's as big of a deal as it really is.
Yeah. And so what do you think like continues this cycle? Because when we think about people like you or people who know it's wrong and can like break out of that kind of concentrated area or break out of the cycle, why is that not stopping like this normalcy of domestic violence and acceptance of domestic violence in our normal culture and dating culture? Like, why do you think it hasn't stopped and it's just a continued cycle?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to it because it doesn't make sense to me. In my opinion, we need to protect our women. That's the most important part of our society, and a lot of men don't agree with that, and really look down on women, and it's really hard to tell which men are thinking that way and which are on the right side.
Yeah. I think you really touched on that about like you talked about the anonymity, but also the fact that men, it's just part of like it's unfortunately a part of our society and the culture that the perspective of women and men and like the relationship of women usually as inferior to men. And so when it comes to domestic violence, when we're exclusively talking with men and women in a relationship, in a young adult relationship, it's very hard to break the systemic thought and stereotype of women in a young adult relationship, especially when you like, even if you believe in it, so don't believe in it so strongly, and you are able like you to like get out of that cycle, it's still hard to like individually fight that. Do you know like how do you envision later on that like in college campuses and young adult relations, how can men like just in their individual parts like break that cycle?
I think it really starts with stopping yourself from joking around about it, because like I said, it's really not funny in any situation.
So really researching about domestic violence, something that kind of caught my eye was the statistic from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence that 1 in 5 college students, so not just exclusively men, not just exclusively women, but 1 in 5 experience or report being abused by an intimate partner.
Wow.
So we're college students. We are under a lot of stress. What kind of stressors, why do you think that stress really has amplified domestic violence in this environment? So why do you think it is 1 in 5?
Yeah, I think that plays a lot into, the immense pressure that college students feel to succeed and, perform in their classes and, their social life and, whatever else might be in their life. And, that pressure can lead into a lot of insecurities if you're not, performing to quite the level that you really want to be at. If you want to have all A's and you get a couple B's one semester, you're going to start feeling insecure, and that's going to leak into other aspects of your life too, not just school. So that insecurity could really play into the fact that a lot of people go back to their abusers, and if they're like in a relationship with them, they don't want to cut that off because they feel the love at times, and oftentimes it's fake, but they get the attention from that person, and whether it's negative attention or positive attention, it's still attention.
Yeah, and for sure, like we talked about, the college environment is very good, but it's also negative in the fact that when we have these situations, like you can't walk away from it necessarily. Like you could be in the class or be in a class or be in the same dorm room as your abuser or the person that you want to physically and like mentally get away from, but like physically you're in the same building.
Right. And
so I think one thing what's hard about that is finding the spaces where you can move on, or find help. So I think like that's one thing that we don't talk about is, okay, I have these people I can talk to, but how do I get out of the situation and like physically get out of the situation, especially on college campus when there's not much flexibility or choice. And I think a lot of that, like especially on our campus, is like talking to the people about your rights. Like you have a right to move where you like, right. Because like this is an actual crisis. So like people have rights in the situation. I think we don't talk about that a lot. I think we stop at, you need to go to therapy, you need to talk to X, Y, and this person, but we never talk about you have the right to do. You have the right to move on. You have the right to have your own space. You have the right to not have them in your classroom. And I think that's really important to talk about, the rights of the victims, male and female.
Absolutely. That education is important to stopping the cycle of abuse as well. And, as it may be very difficult to remove yourself from those situations, even more in college than other aspects of life, there's still avenues you can take to remove yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some signs students should look for in a partner or potential abuser? So I know a lot of times when we're talking about domestic violence, like we said, it's not always very explicit, it's implicit, but it's both. So what I found is most abusers share some common characteristics, subtle warnings. I know some of those are like being like maybe territorial relationship, maybe approaching and almost too good to be true. You stop participating in your activities, kind of keeping a person in their own, in the realm or in the control of one person. So how do you think that some of these warning signs look on college campuses? Because I feel like it's a lot harder to kind of see some of this stuff like we talked about. We all live in the same place. So what are the warning signs specifically that you kind of think are more apparent or less apparent on college campus?
Some warning signs could definitely be, the victim showing less interest in the activities that they used to enjoy. If they used to do intramural sports or, go out and be social at parties more often, and then they, pull back from their friends or pull back from those social activities. That's a big warning sign. Another big warning sign would be that if someone's words and actions don't match, if they're saying, oh, I love this person, or, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me, but then when they're together, they're kind of being more reserved and, like leaning away from the person. It's the body language. Negative body language is a big warning sign for that as well.
For sure, and I think there's a lot of, there's a responsibility for everybody. If you're like friends with a person, and especially in a relationship, we have a responsibility to like be looking at just be looking at the warning signs, be looking at the body language. If we suspect something, a lot of times it's kind of hard to cross that line between suspect and like, oh, this is domestic violence. But I think we still do have a responsibility to be looking around for those warning signs in our relationships and in our own relationships as well. Because I think it's harder for a lot of times to get outside your relationship and look in and see, oh, this sign was a sign of this is a sign of domestic violence, because you're in it. It's hard to get that fuller perspective. So as a student on our campus, or just in campus in general, as a student, college student, are you aware or were you told of resources for domestic violence that are access to you as a student of the campus? Like, were you told this, like, coming in as a freshman?
The University 101 class, that the Title IX, we talked about Title IX a lot, and that every employee of the university is a mandatory reporter. So
and
really,
even students too.
And even students too. So going to anyone like that and, you know, letting them know the situation that you're in is a great first step to getting help.
And I think it's great that we're presented that information, like, as freshmen. Do you, like, now in your final years of, like, college, do you think that information is still reiterated and, like, kept inside the culture so people know? Because I think a lot of times it's great that we know it freshman year, but, like, how are we keeping that in our culture and, like, in our resources going into, like, our higher years of education?
Yeah, that is definitely laxed after freshman year. I did have to do a Title IX course last year, but I think that was just because they changed the requirements. I don't think that was because it was like a maintenance.
Yeah, like a refresher.
But you know, the counseling services on campuses are great. I've used CAPS before, and they're all really nice over there, super understanding, and you know, they're great at what they do, and you know, they're there for a reason. So.
Yeah. I think you're right. Like, outside of that, the counseling, that there is a need, and there's a lacking of keeping the resources that we have available on college campuses in the repertoire. I know for my job, I am able to educate freshmen, and it's part of my job to educate freshmen on the resources on campus, but a lot of that is targeted towards freshmen, and while that's very important, I think there's a responsibility for the university and us as students to keep that information going, because it gets lost, and it gets swept under the rug, especially in the height of, as stress continues, domestic violence cases may continue and kind of get lost under the other stress that we have going on campus. So I think it's really important to keep that conversation going, like we're having right now, to have that conversation open throughout all years and not just exclusive to just freshmen as a course. Is like, let's have that conversation throughout. Let's have information. Let's have that posted. Let's have that in our culture, not just freshman year.
Right, yeah, and that brings up a great point, is that it really needs to be ingrained in our culture.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like, conversations like these are very important and vital to, because there's things that we, not just exclusively like one culture, one religion, one gender, that, like, we're talking about. It's very important to have intersections of conversations where you're bringing a lot of different viewpoints and perspectives in, because that's when we can grow as people, and that we can have more information, and we all can bring something different to the conversation. And I think that's what our university can really improve on, is bringing those conversations in. Do you have anything else to say? I know we've talked a lot today about everything, so.
Yeah, I really think those ways of, you know, pointing out domestic abusers and, you know, calling out your friends for joking about it are really important to ingrain into our culture, to be able to address the issue and, you know, hopefully eradicate it and be able to move on.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching our Blue Table Talk, and really just joining in on our conversation about domestic violence, which is a really important conversation. I hope it inspires everybody else to have more conversations and kind of opens up the floor and makes it more normalized to have these conversations, because they're very important. Some important information as far as Georgia. We have a Georgia crisis hotline for domestic violence. It's 1-800-334-2836. And if you can't do anything else, if you can't have these conversations, have that number and have that resource to give other people, because once we have that resource and once we have information, we can help others and pass it on and hopefully fight domestic violence a lot more. So thank you guys.